Hello, 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 and welcome back to another edition of Fan Talk, your favorite podcast by your favorite fan. That is, of course, me, Kyle Brinchley, in the house on a Friday. It is Friday. Thank you. Weather forecast, it has been snowing. We need the snow. We need it so much. March, always a crazy time, not just for basketball, but in the weather department too. But we're not here to talk about the weather. We're here to talk basketball. As you can see, I have my older brother here, Ryan, joining the podcast. He's been on before. It's been a little bit, but he was very excited to talk some March Madness, some college basketball. But first, let's shout out the Rogue One poster. Check out the new Fan Talk sign gifted to me for Christmas from my sister-in-law, Emily, Ryan's wife. Love it. Looks good. We're just kind of rolling with it right now. Candles burning, and we're ready to go. Fan Talk's a podcast you can find anywhere you get your podcast. I also upload on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. All right, we're talking college basketball again today, and Ryan has a lot of thoughts. Ryan is my go-to sports guy, my number one. Let's talk. The last couple of weeks, we've talked about bracketology, and we've talked about the bubble and how teams can get into the tournament. Last week, I explained the difference between conference tournaments and the NCAA tournament. How the conference tournament is you play teams against your group, and the NCAA tournament is kind of like the final postseason tournament for college basketball. So let me share my screen here so we can look at what Joe Lunardi currently says about the bubble. And now that it's like conference tournament time, he updates this like daily, if not multiple times a day. Okay.
The cool thing about conference tournaments is that it gives these teams an opportunity in a short period of time to quickly build their resume. So teams, usually during the regular season play a maximum of 2 games in a week. Some of these teams are playing 4 or 5 games back to back to back. So that does go on your resume. It does go on your schedule. And it's a real quick opportunity for maybe a bubble team, a team that maybe makes the field by committee, maybe doesn't make the field, to improve their resume, or like you were talking about last week, guarantee their spot in the tournament by winning their conference tournament as well. So just great opportunity for some of these teams to work their way into the tournament.
Yeah, and as you can see here, I'm using Joe Lunardi's ESPN. As you can see here, the bubble, some of those teams, as Ryan was saying, teams like Texas, who are still alive as of today, teams like North Carolina, teams like Oklahoma lost last night, unfortunately, and heartbreaking. But they were able to get a couple more wins added to their resume. Whereas some of these teams like Ohio State, they're out. So they're just, living on a prayer at this point.
Yeah, they lost their one and only game, their opportunity. So all you get is a 0 in the win column and a 1 in the loss column, and that doesn't help your resume one bit.
Not at all.
Teams like San Diego State lost their one and only game in the conference tournament. Teams like Xavier lost their one and only game in the conference tournament. Vanderbilt, throw them in there as well. West Virginia as well. Some of these teams came to the conference tournament and they left after one day, and that was that.
So as you can see here, currently as it's projected, this is how it would go. Again, remember, this side of the bubble are teams that would get in, projected to get in. Teams on this side are teams that would not make it. Some local shout outs. BYU is playing hot right now, so they've jumped all the way up to a 5 seed. With a huge win against Iowa State. That's incredible. They beat them twice in the span of 2 weeks or so. Utah Valley, if they can win their conference, they'll get in. They're currently projected as a 14 seed. And then Utah State, they've kind of been slipping a little. They're dropped all the way down to a 10 seed. They did win against UNLV, which personally, I almost felt just the nature of college basketball, where teams in these bigger conferences, as I've explained before, these more competitive conferences, as some might say, maybe get more leeway. Like you look at a North Carolina team, which last I checked, I'm pretty sure they only had 1 quad 1 win. Maybe it was 1 or 2. And they're like 1-10 in quad 1, which again, quad 1 is like playing teams that are like a really, really good teams. But then you see like a Utah State team who maybe doesn't have as many quad 1 opportunities as a North Carolina team or as a team in these bigger conferences. They're kind of slipping. So I kind of felt like they needed to win that UNLV game. I almost felt like if they lost last night, they would have missed the tournament.
Potentially, yeah. Yeah, the thing with some of these bubble teams, because obviously teams from the better conferences, the power conferences, are going to have more opportunities to play higher ranked teams. So that's where it's important for the committee, I think, to look at the non-conference, because non-conference scheduling, that's something that you can kind of control, and also kind of compare not just like opportunities, but I would actually go off of like how did you do as far as win percentage goes. Yeah, you're talking about North Carolina, and they're 1-11 in quad one opportunities. That's like less than a what is that, like 9%? So they win 9% of their quad one opportunities. Whereas you have some other teams who play 5 games total, maybe some teams like on the bubble that may not have as many opportunities, but they're winning 40% of their quad one opportunities. Really, like if said team, that's winning 40% of their quad opportunities were given the same amount of opportunities as like a North Carolina, you would assume that they're going to win closer to 40% rather than 9%. But like, it's like I don't know what the committee for some teams like North Carolina. I think if you take North Carolina's resume and you put it with any other school and you don't have the Tar Heel Blue and you don't have Michael Jordan, Roy Williams, and just all the championships they've done, I don't think we're even talking about them.
Yeah,
to be honest
absolutely.
with you. And so obviously the North Carolina name, it sells tickets, it sells viewership. So I think maybe that's why they're projected. But you do have to take into consideration, like, given the opportunities, some of these teams are winning at a higher percentage, even though they had less opportunities. And so that's just the nature of the beast between major conference, mid-major conference.
Yeah, and you can even draw a connection to college football. I talked about this a lot with, the expanding the college football playoff format from 4 teams to 12 teams. A couple years ago, Cincinnati was undefeated and they got in as the number 4 seed. But a lot of people believe that, 5, 6, and 7 were in these bigger conferences, they would have been better because Cincinnati went in there and absolutely got boat raced, even though they were undefeated and, deserved it. So, I mean, that's another conversation to have. And it comes up every single year. It's like you take these teams that maybe have more losses, more quad one opportunities, but, maybe they're in a bigger conference, maybe they're better on or perceived to be better than some of these teams. Yeah. Like, they only have 3 or 4 losses, but they're in, the Big West or the Horizon League or, so, I mean, that's up to the committee's job. I think last year I talked about, kind of some beef I had with some of the picks and kind of how that goes. But that's why the conference tournaments are so important, because really it's an opportunity to prove yourselves. And not only that, you can steal spots. So I talked about this, I think 2 weeks ago, how if you win your conference tournament, if you win your group play, then you automatically get in. The rest of the teams get in at large bids. So they get in because of their resume, because of their qualifications.
And that's something to point out. I'll interject. The difference between like the college football playoff and the March Madness tournament is college football playoff, they're kind of saying who are the best 12 teams or whoever, in the country. And that's kind of what they base off of. Time after time, the committee for the March Madness has repeated that it's about resume. It's about what you've done, how many wins, how many losses, who did you beat, who did you lose to, and where did you win and lose. And so that's the main difference, like between college football, a lot more of the eye test. March Madness, they're supposed to actually go strictly off the resume and the numbers. And so hence why you don't see some teams have the opportunity to play in March Madness, because they just didn't play anybody good. They didn't beat anybody good. Whereas other teams did beat other teams good, and therefore they're getting rewarded and put in there based off of what they did as part of that job resume, like you were talking about last week.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, with all the craziness, and keep in mind that today, tomorrow, and even Sunday, there are some games still. So we're still a long way to go before the field is actually set. Selection Sunday will happen Sunday afternoon. But let's look at kind of the projected field as it stands. I do think, obviously there's a lot of teams on the bubble, a lot of teams still trying to get in, but there are quite a few teams who are safely in, quite a few teams who at this point aren't necessarily worried about whether they're in or not, but maybe just trying to win that conference title or just add a few more wins. But looking at the field as it stands, are there any teams that, are sticking out to you or you think have a real shot this year? It's kind of interesting. I think there's a lot of good teams. I think a lot of teams could win it, but I definitely do think that there's a few that are kind of favored or a guess by. So
Well, and the funny thing is, and I think there's been sports commentators and podcasters that have talked about this, but every single year around this time, we put so much emphasis on the bubble teams. Well, why are we talking about the bubble teams when none of these bubble teams tend to like go on and like win the actual dance? Now they go far. Yeah. Sometimes, you know, they're in that first four and they, you know, they get one extra game, they get momentum to go deep into the tournament, but I can't remember a time where a bubble team's actually won it. Yeah. I mean, statistically, the one seeds are going to win.
Yeah.
You know, statistically, like that's how it's going to be when they invented seeding, you know, a couple of years back. The one seeds are going to be winning. So it's like, why aren't we talking about the higher echelon teams, like the top teams, about who we think is actually going to win? Because these bubble teams, to be quite frank, the majority of them we're not even going to be talking about them after, you know, next weekend, after the round of 32 is wrapped up. Like barely any of these teams make it even to the Sweet 16. So I've heard people draw comparisons to the 2021 season where all season long, everyone knew it was going to be Gonzaga, Baylor in the final. And guess what? It was Gonzaga and Baylor in the final because their level of play was just so much better than everyone else. People were kind of drawing that comparison and saying this year is Auburn and Duke, and they're just on a crash course. Obviously, yesterday, as of Thursday, Cooper Flagg, Duke's top player, you know, potential Naismith Player of the Year, went out with injury. We don't know his health situation. Even if Cooper Flagg was healthy, I actually disagree with that. I think this has been the most competitive year of college basketball. The level of play has been the highest it's been in my lifetime, and I think that has a lot to do with NIL. Is probably spread out the talent. Sure. It's not just loaded onto like 4 or 5 blue bloods.
Duke, North Carolina, Kentucky.
And, you know, back then, let's face it, they were paying for their guys. They just were doing it under the table illegally. This go around, you know, it's legal. Everyone's figured it out. There's so many 5th and 6th year seniors that are sticking on for COVID, you know, reasons and whatnot, and those will eventually, you know, stop. But there's just so many experienced teams in the field this year. And I like to reference the KenPom ratings, which is basically just an analytical math that rates the offensive and defensive efficiencies of every single college basketball. This is a record-setting year. There has never been a higher like spread of the highest ratings when it comes to offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency for all the teams. So with that being said, like, yeah, the bell curve kind of moves. Like, I think there's probably a good 20 teams this year that could have won several years ago, you know, over maybe a lesser field. But that makes it all the more exciting for this year for some top teams. So obviously you gotta talk about the one seeds, the Auburns, the Duke, the Houston, the Florida, and then the potential seeds that are the 2 seeds that are potentially fighting for maybe a 1 seed. We're talking about the Tennessee and Alabama out of the SEC, the greatest conference that we've ever seen in college basketball this year, potentially going to get 14 into the field. The record is 11.
That's wild.
They're going to break it by maybe 3. With Oklahoma, who's a great team playing good ball, lost a heartbreaker last night as maybe that 14th team that gets in, which is crazy to say. And then you have Michigan State, their regular conference champion of Big Ten, and they just won their semifinal game today, or their quarterfinal game today. They could be a tournament champion as well, so kind of hard to maybe get them off the one line. Any other year, you know, that qualifies them for the one line. But this year, it's ultra competitive. Florida right now is holding on to that projected 4th number 1 seed. Kind of the difference between a 1 seed and a 2 seed, because like I mentioned, I'd have to pull up the statistic, but like 1 seeds have won it like 20-something more times than a 2 seed has. And a big part of that is 1 seeds get to go play in the Sweet 16 and Elite 8, the regionals, closest to their geographic location. So for instance, this year, Auburn would be the projected number 1 overall seed. They get to go up the road, not too far, Lexington, Kentucky, and that's where they would be playing their regional out of, if they make it, of course. No, excuse me. Auburn would actually play their first round games in Lexington, Kentucky, and then even a shorter drive would be Atlanta, Georgia, which is like, if you know where Auburn is, it's on the eastern half of Alabama. So it's not that far of a drive at all. My wife grew up in that area of western Georgia, and more people were Auburn fans in that western Georgia than actual Georgia Bulldogs fans.
Gotcha.
So yeah, Auburn, obviously they're excited because now they get to play their regional. How many fans are they going to have? You know, just make the short drive up to Atlanta. Duke right now would be projected to go play as the number 2 overall seed or the second 1 seed. They would get to go play first in Raleigh and then up the coast in New Jersey. A little bit more of a drive, but still stays the same time zone, same East Coast. You just get on one of the freeways. It's not that far. But then you see and then as you go down the seeds, we got Florida that's going to have to go all the way and play out in San Francisco for their regional. So that's not exactly what we'd call a home field or a home court advantage to get their fans out there. And then you have some other 2 seeds that, the difference of playing close to home and not playing as close to home. Tennessee, I'm sure, would love to play closer to home, but they're currently projected to have to go play in Cleveland, in their first round game. And that's just the next available home site. So that's kind of the difference. Mm-hmm. These are the top teams that are going to end up winning this thing. Dark horses, if you want to talk about dark horses, I think there are some dark horses. So if a dark horse in my mind, maybe a team that's not a 1 or a 2 seed, maybe not even maybe a 3 seed, because you don't see the 3 seeds. You do see 3 seeds win it, but not as often as the 1 seeds. Because I love all those teams. I think any one of those top 8 teams can win it. I really like Texas Tech as well. I think they're awesome. They split the season series with Houston. As far as potential dark horse teams, pay attention to I know we go back and forth on Gonzaga, but Gonzaga, number 8 in the net, but they're going to end up getting an 8, 7, 9 seed area. What does that mean? Basically, their analytics are really good. Their resume maybe not as well, and that's why they're going to get an 8, 9 seed, but their analytics say they're an amazing team. Other teams you got to look out for, Maryland. They're going to come in around a 4 seed. Maryland's a really good team this year. They are... I brought up KenPom earlier. They are very high in regards to offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency. You kind of look for those metrics when you're picking your brackets. Who can play offense really well? Who can play defense really well? Because, what happens when your shot isn't falling? Are you able to defend? If you're not good at defense and the other team is scoring, then what are you going to do? So it's always important, as you're looking at teams and trying to project a winner, who's also good at offense and who's also good at defense. You can't just be good at one. Otherwise, you'll end up running into someone who's having a hot shooting night or is locked down defense. So,
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, when it comes to the postseason, it takes a whole kind of overall effort. I mean, because you look at some of these teams who are really good offensively or really good defensively, or maybe have talented players, but it's a combination of those things, and also having a really great coach. I mean, a lot of these teams have great coaches, as you mentioned, Gonzaga with Mark Few. I look at UConn, who has won it back-to-back years. They're only projected as an 8 seed, maybe kind of taking a step or 2 back this season.
Yeah, but as an 8 seed, what 1 seed wants to play them in the very next round?
That could definitely be currently projected against Duke, with Dan Hurley and with that great team. So I think, again, the field's not quite set yet, but as you look at these projections, obviously pay attention to the seed that they do have. But also don't get too caught up in the seed. Also know that, potentially, and this will come in handy when you're picking your brackets. And if you haven't done that already, obviously the field's not set, but if you haven't signed up, go sign up for a bracket pick'em. It's the funnest thing ever. Maybe throw some money in there, have some fun. But don't just pick the higher seed. Look at matchups. Look at where they're playing. I mean, you like I said, you look at UConn, who's an 8 seed, you might be like, okay, maybe they win their first round game, but they lose. They could very well upset Duke, especially if Cooper Flagg's, health is in question. But
yeah, if they upset Duke and they in this instance, they upset Duke and they're playing in New York, that's not very. New York is not very far from Connecticut, that's not a bad place to be having a Sweet 16 regional. I actually, this was Dan Hurley's first championship year at UConn Huskies. This was the regional where they had to go all the way out to Las Vegas. They still won out of that regional. That team was just crazy good, but that was a 4 seed. And they were power rated so well, and everyone kind of knew that they would be a really good team because their power rating was higher maybe than their seed. And that's why I bring up somebody like Gonzaga. It's like their seed, even UConn this year, it's like their seed doesn't necessarily show how good of a team they are at power rating. Again, these seeds are handed out based off a resume, and they probably just didn't win some of the games that they needed to this year, and hence that's why they get bumped down a couple of seed lines as well. So there's a lot of good sneaky teams. Clemson is another one.
Absolutely.
That's a hot team. They're the only ones to beat Duke in conference. That was Duke's lone conference loss. They won that game. And I think because they maybe had a bad loss here or there, maybe that's what, or just the fact that the top 16 teams, the top 1, 2, 3, 4 seeds are stacked. And maybe that's why Clemson's getting a 5 seed. I think in other years, I think they're much higher. So yeah, just teams that are like analytically, they're really good, but their seeds maybe aren't indicative just because this is such a stacked field. You can't make everyone a 1 seed. You can't make everyone a 2 seed.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. A couple teams I'm kind of looking at. I like Ole Miss as a 5 seed. They, took it to Auburn, almost beat them. Auburn won by 5.
Auburn's a bad matchup for Ole Miss. They don't have the size to out rebound Auburn. So I think Ole Miss, is scary good. Just a bad matchup with Auburn today.
Yeah, like I said earlier, the SEC is loaded. I think any team from the SEC could surprise, could make some runs. I mean, you look at a team like Arkansas, who's only an 11 seed, but they got John Calipari as their coach, who has a ton of experience when it comes to the postseason. They pretty much should have actually beaten Ole Miss, but a couple missed free throws and then a clutch 3-pointer kind of puts them away. A Missouri team, they're good. Texas A&M, very good teams. I mean, pretty much, I'd say anyone out of the SEC, watch out for. I see there's a couple teams in the Big 12 that are looking pretty good. Houston, Iowa State, even BYU's playing really hot right now.
If you had to make a just hot projection right now, like 14 SEC, let's say 14 SEC teams, make it to the field, how many make it to the Sweet 16, make it to the second weekend? What would you guess?
If I'm just throwing it out there, I'm not looking at how many teams are in each thing. I'd say at least 4, but I could see 6.
I'm thinking like it could be upwards of 7 or 8.
Really?
That's how good. Yeah, I think there are some lower teams like Oklahoma, Texas. They might have a hard time getting out of there. When you have let's count this real quick. When you have out of the top 2 seeds, 4 of them are out of the SEC. So there's your 4 right there. It's like assuming that those 4 make it. Then you have another 3 seed projected right now. Then you have another 4 seed projected right now. You have a 5 seed in there. It's just it's just such a dominant conference this year that I think 4 or 5 is a good bet. To make it to the Sweet 16, that means you win. That means you win your first round game, and that means win your second round game, which is usually played Saturday or Sunday, the first week of March Madness, and then you make it to the second weekend, which is Sweet 16 or Elite 8.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch. And again, the conference tournaments we're still in the thick of it, like today, tomorrow, and a few on Sunday. So if you don't have weekend plans, if you don't know what to do on a Friday night, if you don't know what to do with yourself, then you should be watching college basketball. I mean, I don't know, the NBA's on, the NHL's on, and I'm like, are people really watching NHL and NBA during this time of year? Like, I can't believe people are actually tuning in to like TNT Thursday night NBA basketball when there's college basketball conference tournaments being played all day long.
I mean, the diehard NBA fans that study film and whatnot. Sure. Shout out Ryan Rosillo, who watches like 8-9 games every single night type deal. But the normal sports fan or just the casual sports viewer, like, there's no way in a heck you're throwing on like hockey or NBA right now. And that's the thing. Like, March Madness does that right. They make the viewing experience so good, whether it's conference tournaments or it's March Madness. It is like one of the most viewed sporting events out there. And if you haven't watched it yet, like, please join in, fill out a bracket, get in a group, do a Survivor, type deal. Just get involved. It's so much fun. There's energy wherever you go, and there's energy if you're like there personally watching it, or there's energy at the sports bar watching it, or just with some friends or family just watching it at home. There's just a palpable energy there you cannot explain.
You said it. All right, so your homework is go watch some conference tournaments, go fill out a bracket. Again, the field, the entire NCAA tournament, March Madness, will be set come Sunday. I'll be doing another episode on Monday, kind of just looking at the field and maybe making some projections, looking at potential fun matchups and all sorts of things. So stay tuned for that. It's a fun time of year. We're doing more episodes than I'm used to, but I love it. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on. Any last words before we tell them to go watch some games?
No, yeah, just enjoy it. Me and Kyle will be staying up late watching our Utah State Aggies, where we both graduated from.
9:30 p.m. tip.
The truth of the matter is, like, it's a projected 9:30 tip, but like, it's probably going to get pushed back. They always do. So I'm actually projecting like a 10 p.m. Mountain Standard Time tip. Like if you're on the East Coast, I don't know how the CBS Sports Inside College Basketball guys do it. They're in New York doing a studio show.
When the game starts.
It's just crazy. But that's the thing. They just have so many games going on. There's only little TV time like slots, so they're just squeezing them all in. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll be up at 10 o'clock tonight watching the Utah State Aggies take on Colorado State Rams. Go Aggies. That's what I would say.
Yeah, go Aggies. Big game for them. All right, guys. Well, that's all for this week's episode or this today's episode. Tune in again on Monday for another March Madness Fan Talk. Again, this is a podcast you can find anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next week for another edition of Fan